But we begin in Washington, where a suspect has been arrested after two staff members at the Israeli embassy were shot and killed. The pair were leaving an event at a Jewish museum Wednesday night. The 31-year-old suspect has been identified as Elias Rodriguez of Chicago, and he shouted "Free Palestine" when he was taken into custody. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered enhanced security at Israeli missions in the aftermath of that attack. For more on the story, we can go across to Fraser Jackson, standing by in Washington. Fraser, what's the latest we're hearing from where you are?
So the latest we know is that the shooting happened around 9 p.m. local time when two staff members of the Israeli embassy were shot at close range outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. The two people who are deceased have been described as 30-year-old Yaron Lishinsky and 26-year-old Sarah Milgram, both local hires for the Israeli embassy here in D.C. The Israeli ambassador said that the young couple were engaged to be married, and they were at an event where the panel was discussing their efforts to get aid into the Gaza Strip, and it's understood that the pair had both been working with separate associations to try to help Palestinians get more aid into the Gaza Strip. Well, the suspect who committed this shooting allegedly is a 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago. He's had no previous contact with police. He was not known to the police, but he was seen loitering outside of the event when he then opened fire on a group of 4 people, fatally killing 2 of them. The suspect then threw away his weapon and entered the venue where people inside the venue thought that he was somebody who had heard the shooting outside and had escaped inside to the venue to try to get away from the shooting. And one witness was talking to him and said, "Do you know what this building is? Do you think that's why the shooting happened?" And he said, "No, I did it. I did it for Gaza, free Palestine," at which point he pulled out a keffiyeh from his bag and was then promptly arrested by event security. Well, the reaction has been pouring in. Donald Trump in the early hours of the morning called this shooting a horrible DC killing based obviously on anti-Semitism. He said it must end now. Hatred and radicalism have no place in the USA. We're also hearing from other top US officials, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, who said we will bring this depraved perpetrator to justice. The highest-ranking Jewish official in the US government, Chuck Schumer, said this sickening shooting seems to be another horrific instance of anti-Semitism, which, as we know, is all too rampant in our society. And the Israeli ambassador to the UN called it a depraved act of anti-Semitic terrorism, a similar line being struck there by Netanyahu as well, who called the suspect a vile anti-Semitic murderer. He's also ordered the increase of security at embassies and missions worldwide.
Fraser, we of course know that anti-Semitic attacks have increased in the aftermath of those October 7th attacks, whether we're talking about here in France or over in the United States. But I'm curious to know, has the Trump crackdown on pro-Palestinian protests fanned tensions where you are?
Well, as you said, there has been a steady rise in anti-Semitism in the US ever since the attacks on October 7, 2023, mainly due to the way in which Israel has responded to those attacks and the ensuing images of devastation which have been coming out of the Gaza Strip. Of course, this is a hugely polarizing issue, with most Americans feeling an almost instinctive pull and sympathies to the Israelis or the Palestinians. But of course, last year we saw a massive wave of protests on university campuses across the United States. And since the Trump administration came into office, they've been actively tracking down students who were involved in those protests and cancelling their visas. It's become a real kind of touch point here in the United States. The government is now monitoring the social media activity of people it believes were included in those protests, and there have been some high-profile arrests of leaders of those protest movements across the US. Now, of course, the outcry has also been swift against that, but once again, it is a very polarizing issue, with Jewish students at the time reporting that they felt unsafe. And the war of words is now continuing here as the US continues to vow to crack down on anti-Semitic, what it calls anti-Semitic behavior. It's even targeting those higher education institutions such as Harvard, who experienced those campus protests earlier last year, and accusing them of not doing enough to protect Jewish students as well. And it's cancelling a lot of their funding as well. So this is a wide-ranging issue here in the US. But of course, these kind of senseless killings really mar the waters and are pretty much universally rejected by both sides of the argument.
Fraser, thank you very much for that update. Fraser Jackson reporting there for us from Washington. Now, for more on the